So as we get close to the end of the war, it's time to discuss one of the most unique elements of this period of time in the Clone Wars, and that's Order 66. So I figured today we'd go over some of the basics of the Republic's contingency orders and what they really mean. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So all of us are familiar with Order 66. It's the order given by the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic that orders clone troopers to basically turn on their Jedi leaders. It is a sort of hard ingrained protocol that was installed in the heads of all the clone troopers from birth and would remain with them throughout their entire lives. So let's discuss these contingency protocols and specifically talk a little bit about Order 66. So for starters, Order 66 doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's actually one of 150 contingency orders issued by the Grand Army of the Republic that can be activated at any given time. Now, we don't know what any of these other orders are in canon, but we know in Legends they included circumstances like the Supreme Chancellor committing treason, or the Senate needing to be subdued during a particularly aggressive session, things that would require an adjustment to the chain of command within the Republic military leadership. And along this line, one of those orders, Order 66, was in place for the scenario in which the Jedi betray the Republic. So it was one of many contingency orders, and while this one was likely planted directly by Palpatine, who ordered this one put in place, he likely ordered all the others simply to cover his tracks, so that if anyone found out about these contingency orders installed in the clones, it would seem more like a security precaution and less like a plot to destroy the Jedi. When activated, these contingency orders basically forced the clones against their will to carry out these orders without question. This included things like arresting the Supreme Chancellor, arresting senators, or killing the Jedi. Some of these orders would have involved things like establishing martial law or maintaining military control over an area, even against the will of the local population, which we know was one of the Legends orders. In fact, one of these orders that we know from Legends was that clone troopers could be ordered to kill civilians to bring insurgents out of hiding, which was a very dark prospect that the Republic would have never had to use during the Clone Wars, but is a tactic that would be used occasionally by the Galactic Empire. So how did these contingency orders actually work? Well, there was a biological chip installed in the brains of all of the clones, the inhibitor chips, which, well, we most famously know them as the chips that trigger Order 66. These chips would likely be used to trigger basically every contingency order, and would just trigger slightly differently based on what order was actually triggered. Now, it's worth noting that, as we see in the Bad Batch, the clone's personality basically disappears when these chips are activated and has to be brought back through external means. So it's my theory that only one of these orders could have been activated at any time. The activation of any of these contingency orders basically breaks the clone as a person, forcing them to act more like a machine than a human being, and significantly degrading their combat capabilities as they lose a little bit of free will and free thinking. So upon hearing the activation code from the proper authorities, in the case of Order 66, it was an order from the Supreme Chancellor himself issuing Order 66, the inhibitor chips would have activated, they would have modified the clone's brains, and basically forced them to follow these orders, even if their conscious mind refused. The end result was a series of heartbreaking betrayals when the Jedi were forcibly killed by their clone forces that they had been fighting alongside for the entire duration of the war. As far as we know in canon, there were no other contingency orders ever activated. However, I don't think that's necessarily impossible. I think it's possible that, especially under the Empire, during those early days when the clones were still serving as the primary infantry force of the Galactic Empire, that some of these contingency orders would have been used to subdue local populations or rowdy senators that maybe were less than approving of the Emperor's rise to power. It's also possible, however, that the activation of Order 66 basically made the activation of other orders impossible because it would have basically destroyed the inhibitor chips in the process. After all, we see the massive changes that the inhibitor chips do to the clones' brains. At the end of the day, Order 66 is the big tragedy at the end of the Clone Wars. It was a sad ending to 2.5 years of vicious fighting that ultimately ended in brothers in combat turning on one another. And it's likely that the effect of these inhibitor chips is one of the reasons why the Empire ultimately pivoted from using clone soldiers to biological recruits. If you'd like to learn more about why the Empire chose to use stormtroopers over clone troopers, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think the inhibitor chips could have been used more than once. Do you think a clone who had their inhibitor chip activated could have ever been given another contingency order? Or do you think, since Order 66 was activated and the chips were activated, it modified their brain so much that the chips couldn't be used again. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.